Starter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are on the Central Coast. We're joined by Ian Parkinson. He is the sheriff of San Luis Obispo County. And sir, you've been in law enforcement for a long time. And when I think about how we as Americans felt towards our police officers after 9/11, we wanted to hug you all. I mean, we wanted to embrace you. But the last couple of years, I feel as if we've gone back to the 60s and 70s ethos, which is, cops are not our friends, they're our enemy. And so how are you doing? How is your force doing in terms of that wave of negative emotion towards law enforcement?
That's a tough one because every bad event that occurs we feel it. Right. And even though it's outside of our county, our state, it's still something that is reflected upon us. So I think for us, it's been a constant reminder that we live in a different environment, and we have to embrace the fact that we live in an environment that we are generally, very much liked still.
Do you feel that though? I mean, I really want to dig deep on this because, geez, I just feel as if that overwhelming sense, that majority sense of goodwill towards officers, at least in some communities, is evaporating.
It is slightly. I would say that we're fighting about everything.
Right.
I mean, we're angry about everything. I mean, there's nobody sacred anymore.
Right.
But to the most part, I think we have a pretty positive county. We're very, I think, very fortunate in that.
Well,
respect.
There's no doubt we're on the Central Coast, and there is a general sense of goodwill in this county. San Luis Obispo called the happiest city in America by Oprah Winfrey. So there is something about this place that is unique and special. But you are clearly faced with scenarios, and more importantly, your force, your colleagues are faced with scenarios where they need to make split-second decisions. And those split-second decisions can have wide-ranging ramifications. You think about what happened in Chicago, what happens in New York, these officers are making split-second decisions and they become national news for years.
Right.
And
right.
so how do you work with your officers, your deputy sheriffs, to make that best split-second decision that will have the right desired outcome?
Well, I think it begins with the hiring process. I mean, you've got to get the right person in that position, and you've got to realize that that it's not an easy thing to do, especially these times, recruiting people that are solid, but also reminding people that majority of people we deal with are good people.
Right.
I mean, we don't deal with the bad ones, every day, or it's not the overwhelming majority. So reminding them that that's who they're dealing with, and that's what our ultimate job is to keep them safe.
But recently, there was an incident in, I think it was North San Luis Obispo County, where your officers were taxed immensely. Give us some background about the incident, and then I want to kind of dissect it and show how, in this case, they probably acted in a way that was for the best interest of not only the suspect, but the entire community.
Certainly. So we recently went up to the rural Paso Robles area and up near Lake Nacimiento on a call of essentially checking the welfare of a individual that was living on a piece of property and had not been heard of. A person connected to the property went over to check on him and discovered that he was actually deceased in the house. Ooh. And the female, who is the suspect in the case, was there, and he realized quickly that he was in the wrong spot, retreated out of the house, called us. We responded, went up to the house, surrounded the house. After attempts to have some type of communication failed, we sent in a special team we had to go check on this individual, make sure, was he still alive? And
right, because the person who checked on him, the landlord, believed him to be dead. And the woman who was there was making statements that appeared to have been demonstrations of mental illness. Is that fair?
That's fair. And so when the team went in, she retreated into an upstairs bedroom. They went throughout the house. They located the subject. He had been deceased. We later determined by gunshots. But while they're checking on him, she began to shoot through the wall at our deputies that were in the house.
At that moment, would it have been legal to return fire?
Absolutely, 100%. They have a right to protect themselves. They're being shot at. It's very clear that it's it's law enforcement there. They made the decision not to. They didn't know it was beyond that wall. They didn't know who else was in the house.
That's true. There could have been other people. Well stated.
And so they made the decision that it was best to retreat at that point. They did so. We continued for hours surrounding the house and trying to communicate with her, trying to convince her to surrender. To no avail. We eventually put tear gas into the residence. At some point during that event, she decided to shoot out of the house again.
At that point, could your officers have shot back? Legally?
Absolutely. She was shooting at deputies. It was very clear at that point. We'd had communication with her that it was us. And so she was absolutely shooting at deputies. And they didn't return fire.
Why?
Because the gas in the air made it very difficult for them to see her and where she was, and felt that at that point they could not clearly shoot the person that was shooting at them.
And you mentioned the gas in the air. You mentioned you were in rural Paso Robles. Could bullets have created an incendiary situation?
Absolutely. And then remember, those bullets have to land somewhere. So for them surrounding the scene, if they're shooting at an unknown object inside, those bullets are going to travel probably to the other side. And you have deputies and special enforcement detail out around the house, so and you're jeopardizing them.
Right.
So it's not as simple as you and I standing here and them being shot at. So unfortunately, there's a small fire started up in the corner of the bedroom that turned.
But we understand that small fire was likely started by her bullets. Is that accurate?
No, we're not really clear on that. We believe it could have been related to one of the gas rounds.
It's hard to know.
Yeah,
it's hard to know.
But it resulted in large flames, which in the middle of a rural area in fire season prior to the rains was very dangerous.
But you were prescient and you thought this could happen, so you had a fire engine on standby.
Correct.
And so you were able to get that fire put out very quickly. So good job. But now she's still outside.
Well, she was inside at that point. She finally, between a combination of being probably overwhelmed by the gas and the fire coming, she came out of the house. She sat down. She refused to obey commands.
As there's flames.
As there are flames shooting up into the nearby tree.
Did you know if she was armed?
The deputies couldn't see.
And so at that point, you have to make a decision. Your force has to make a decision. There's a fire going. It could, become a wildfire. We don't want that. She's sitting there. We don't know what to do. What do you do?
They eventually had to make the decision. Shouldn't say eventually. Very quickly had to make the decision that they had a fire engine coming in. We had to get the fire out, and they had to get her off the porch. And they made the decision to put themselves in jeopardy to go up and actually put hands on with her, not knowing if she still had the handgun that they'd seen her earlier with.
Could they have shot then?
For her, absolutely.
And they
at
did.
that
so
point,
there are arguably 3 instances where they legally could have shot, and they did not.
Correct.
Where's the presence of mind to make that apparent wise decision?
Yes. I think the thing that I'm proud of is that they thought through the consequences of what they were doing. Ultimately, I don't think in many instances throughout the country that a officer or deputy wants to take a life.
Of course.
They feel they have to, and for whatever the circumstances. In this case, I think they could, but is it the safest thing to do? Is it the right thing to do? And I think for them to exercise that thought process in a highly, dynamic, charged, adrenaline-pumped event is just phenomenal in 3 different times.
Right. His name is Ian Parkinson. He is the sheriff for San Luis Obispo County. I'm Brad Pomerance. You're watching Charter Local Edition.